Gabriel Ardent, the Alpha King of the North, did not slow down as he reached the hidden ridge. The wind carried the scent of blood long before he saw the bodies. Two of his most trusted guards lay at the entrance of the den, their throats torn open, their weapons broken beside them. These were not careless men. They had guarded this place for years, and only two others in the entire kingdom even knew it existed. If they were dead, then the attack had been planned carefully, and the target could only be one thing: his heirs. He moved forward without hesitation, pushing past the stone entrance, already bracing himself for what he might find inside. 6 young heirs, his only bloodline, hidden here for their safety while he handled unrest in the east. If anything had happened to them, there would be no council left to judge, no noble left to negotiate. He would burn the entire court to the ground. But what he saw stopped him cold. The den was not filled with death. It was quiet, warm. The fire in the center had been recently lit, flames still steady. And his 6 heirs were not crying, not injured, not dead. They were asleep. All 6 of them were piled on top of a stranger. The young man lay on his side near the fire, his body thin, his clothes torn and dirt-stained. One arm was wrapped protectively around the smallest pup, while the others were sprawled across his chest, his legs, even his shoulder. Their breathing was slow and steady, completely at ease. Clean fur, full bellies, no sign of fear. Gabriel did not move for a few seconds because nothing about this made sense. The den still carried the scent of violence. There was blood on the stone wall, not fresh, but recent. A broken blade lay near the entrance. A body had been dragged outside. This stranger had fought here, fought hard enough to survive against trained killers. And then, somehow, he had calmed 6 alpha blood heirs enough to make them sleep on him like he belonged there. Gabriel stepped closer, silent despite his size. His presence alone usually made grown alphas lower their heads, yet none of his heirs reacted the way they should have. The eldest, a sharp-eyed boy named Ronan, opened his eyes briefly. For a moment their gazes met. Gabriel expected him to get up, to run to him. Ronan didn't move. Instead, the boy let out a low, content rumble and rested his chin back on the stranger's chest, as if nothing had changed. Something in Gabriel's chest tightened. He reached out slowly, not toward his children, but toward the stranger. The moment his fingers brushed against the young man's hair, the air shifted. The scent that had been faint and muted suddenly cracked open for a fraction of a second. It was subtle but unmistakable. Omega. Not just any omega. A rare one. The scent carried a strange calm, like fresh herbs after rain. Something that pressed gently against instinct instead of provoking it. Gabriel's alpha reacted immediately, not with aggression, but with sharp, focused awareness. The stranger stirred slightly, his brow tightening as if caught in a dream. Up close, Gabriel could see more details. A deep cut along the temple, already clotted. Bruises forming along his arms. This was not someone who had been hiding. This was someone who had fought with everything he had. And he was not a beta, no matter what the clothes suggested. Behind him, a shadow moved at the entrance. Kale stepped inside, his expression grim. He was Gabriel's most trusted scout, the only other man who knew about the den. His gaze flicked from the dead guards outside to the scene in front of him, and for the first time he looked uncertain. "My king," Kale said quietly. "The attackers were from the eastern faction. We tracked them too late." Gabriel did not take his eyes off the stranger. He stopped them. Kale followed his gaze, studying the unconscious Omega more carefully. "Alone. There's no one else here." Kale exhaled slowly. "Then he's either very skilled or very dangerous." Gabriel finally straightened slightly. "Both." He looked down at his heirs again. 6 of them, alive because of someone who should not even be here. Someone who had bypassed every secret, every layer of protection, and yet had done nothing but protect what mattered most. One of the smaller pups shifted, pressing closer into the Omega's side. A soft sound left him. Not fear, not pain, but comfort. That decided it. Gabriel bent down and carefully lifted the smallest pup first. The little one whined in protest, tiny claws gripping weakly at the fabric of the Omega's shirt before letting go. The others stirred but did not wake fully. One by one, Gabriel gathered all 6 into his arms. None of them called for him. All of them searched for the Omega's scent. Gabriel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something heavier. He turned to Kale. Bring him. Kale frowned slightly. My king, we don't know who he is. If the council finds out. They won't. Gabriel cut him off, his voice dropping into a tone that left no room for argument. Use the private passage. No one sees him. No one hears about this. Kale hesitated for a brief second, then nodded. Understood. Gabriel paused at the entrance, looking back one last time. The Omega still hadn't woken. Even with the airs gone, his body remained curled slightly inward, as if he was still protecting them in his sleep. Gabriel narrowed his eyes. An Omega who could fight trained killers. An Omega whose scent calmed alpha heirs. An Omega who walked into a hidden den no outsider should ever find. This was not coincidence. As he stepped out into the cold with his children held close, one thought settled clearly in his mind. Whoever that Omega was, he had just stepped into a war he didn't even know existed. And Gabriel was not going to let him disappear. 3 months earlier, the Omega, now lying unconscious in the Alpha King's private chambers, had been running through cold rain with nothing but a knife and a fading dose of scent suppressor in his system. His name was Hugo Viral, born into one of the most powerful noble families in the Southern Territories. A family that treated Omegas not as people but as assets. His father, Lord Matteo Viral, had spent years trying to turn him into the perfect bargaining piece. Someone who could produce heirs and secure alliances with stronger alpha houses. Hugo had strength, speed, and a rare calming scent, which only made Matteo value him more as a tool rather than a son. Hugo refused. That refusal had cost him everything. He had been beaten, starved, locked away, and still Matteo didn't break him. So Hugo made the only decision left. He stole a vial of suppressants, cut his hair short, bound his scent as tightly as he could, and disappeared into the night under a false identity. In the outside world, he became Hugh, a quiet beta drifter who took whatever work he could find and never stayed long enough to be noticed. It worked for a while. He eventually reached the Northern Territories, far from his father's influence. Life there was harsher, colder, but also freer. No one cared who he had been. They only cared if he could work. Hugo found himself in a logging camp near the edge of the Alpha King's domain, hauling timber, splitting wood, pushing his body until exhaustion became routine. He didn't complain. Compared to what he left behind, this felt like peace. But Hugo had never been good at ignoring suffering. When a lung sickness spread through the camp, most workers avoided the infected, afraid of catching it themselves. Hugo recognized the symptoms immediately. He remembered the remedies his mother had once used before she disappeared from his life. That night, he slipped out, gathered herbs from the forest, and left a prepared brew outside a sick worker's door. He didn't say a word. He didn't stay to be thanked. He did it again the next night, and the next. People started whispering about a ghost healer, someone moving unseen through the camp. Hugo kept his head down, but he knew attention was dangerous. What he didn't know was that someone had already noticed him. Kale, the Alpha King's chief scout, had been in the area tracking suspicious movements from the Eastern faction. He wasn't there for Hugo, but patterns mattered. A nameless worker who avoided attention, who moved quietly at night, who knew herbs well enough to treat illness without formal training, that stood out. Kale didn't confront him immediately. He observed, watched, waited. Then he sent a report north. A few days later, Hugo was summoned. He was taken from the camp under the pretense of labor reassignment. No explanation, no negotiation. Refusing a royal summons in the Northern Territories wasn't an option. Hugo kept his head low and followed, his mind already calculating escape routes that he knew he probably wouldn't get to use. The castle was nothing like the southern estates he had grown up in. It was colder, quieter, built for function more than display. People didn't gossip openly. They watched, listened, chose their words carefully. Hugo was assigned to the lowest level of service. Kitchen work, cleaning, carrying supplies. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be seen. He kept his voice rough, his posture neutral, his scent locked down. To everyone around him, He was just another tired beta trying to survive. But the deeper he moved into the castle, the more he noticed the tension. The Alpha King, Gabriel Ardent, was not present. He was dealing with unrest in the east. In his absence, the council held power, and at the center of that council was Javier Morcant. A noble with influence, sharp instincts, and a reputation for smiling while he cut people down politically. Hugo didn't know the full picture, but he knew enough to recognize danger when he saw it. Something was shifting in the castle. Quietly, deliberately, Hugo stayed out of it. That was the plan. Until the night everything changed. He couldn't sleep. The suppressants were wearing thinner than usual, making his senses sharper, his instincts more restless. The castle felt wrong. Too quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Hugo slipped out of the servant quarters and moved through the outer paths, keeping to shadows, avoiding patrol routes he had memorized over the past weeks. That was when he heard it. A sharp, frightened sound. Small. Not human. Hugo froze, then turned toward it without thinking. The sound came again. A whimper, followed by a low, threatening growl and the scrape of metal against stone. Hugo moved faster, instincts overriding caution. He reached the edge of a rocky outcrop behind the castle, a place rarely patrolled, and saw the scene unfold in front of him. Two men in dark gear had cornered a group of small wolf pups against a stone formation. Their weapons were drawn, movements precise. They weren't random attackers. They were trained. The pups were too young to fight, too small to run. One of the men raised his blade. Hugo didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron rod left from maintenance work, and charged. The first strike was clumsy but powerful enough to knock the blade aside. The man turned in shock, clearly not expecting interference from a random servant. That hesitation cost him. Hugo moved again, faster this time, striking low, then high, using momentum and surprise rather than strength. The second attacker reacted more quickly, circling, trying to flank. Hugo adjusted, forcing both men to stay in front of him. It wasn't clean fighting. It wasn't trained technique. It was survival. The first man went down hard, his leg buckling under a direct hit. The second tried to press the advantage, but Hugo didn't give him space. He closed the distance, slammed the rod into his hand, and heard the crack of bone before the weapon dropped. The man cursed, staggered, then ran, dragging his injured partner with him into the darkness. Silence returned. Hugo stood there for a second, breathing hard, every muscle shaking from adrenaline. Then he turned to the pups. 6 of them, huddled together, terrified. "It's okay," he said quietly, lowering himself to their level. "They're gone." They didn't move at first. Then one stepped forward, sniffing cautiously. Hugo stayed still, letting them decide. When the first one pressed closer, the others followed. They were freezing. Hugo looked around quickly and noticed the narrow opening behind them. A hidden entrance carved into stone. He didn't question it. He just gathered the pups carefully and carried them inside. The den was already prepared. Old furs, a fire pit, supplies hidden in compartments. Whoever owned this place had intended it as a safe haven. Hugo got to work. He lit a fire, hands steady despite the tremor in his arms. He pulled out the small game he had caught earlier that day, something he had planned to eat alone, and started cooking. He fed the pups piece by piece, slow and careful. Once they settled, he cleaned them with melted snow, wiping away dirt and blood until their fur was soft again. All the while, he spoke quietly, not even realizing his voice had softened into its natural tone. His scent shifted slightly, slipping through the cracks of the suppressants. The pups relaxed completely. By the time exhaustion finally caught up to him, they were warm, full, and calm. Hugo leaned back against the furs, intending to rest for just a minute. The pups climbed onto him without hesitation, curling into his body as if they had already decided he was safe. Hugo closed his eyes. Under his hand, faint and almost unnoticeable, the ancient runes carved into the stone floor responded to his presence with a low, quiet pulse. And then everything went still. Hugo woke to warmth, softness, and a sense so strong it forced his instincts to react before his mind could catch up. Pine, cold iron, winter air, and something deeper, something that pressed down on his chest and demanded awareness. Alpha. Not just any alpha. A dominant one. His eyes snapped open, and for a brief second, he didn't move, because survival had taught him that stillness could buy time. He was not in the den. The ceiling above him was carved wood, dark and precise, nothing like stone. The furs beneath him were softer than anything he had touched in years. His body felt clean, the dried blood gone, the wound at his temple tightly bandaged. His clothes were different too, simple but high quality. Someone had changed him while he was unconscious. Hugo sat up too quickly. The room tilted, and pain flared through his head, but he ignored it. His gaze moved fast, scanning exits, windows, distance to the door, anything he could use if this turned bad. The air was controlled, sealed. One door. No obvious weapons. Not good. The door opened before he could move further. Kale stepped inside first, the same scout he had seen briefly at the den entrance. Tall, composed, carrying authority without needing to speak. Behind him came an older man, thin, careful, holding a tray filled with medical tools and herbs. The royal physician, though Hugo didn't know his name yet. "Stay still," the old man said calmly, setting the tray down. "You lost blood. Moving too fast will reopen the wound." Hugo ignored that. "The pups." His voice came out rough, instinct overriding caution. "Where are they?" Kale studied him for a second before answering. "Alive. Safe. With their father." Father. The word landed hard. Hugo's mind snapped pieces together quickly. The hidden den. The trained attackers. The level of security. The scent that lingered faintly in the room even now. The Alpha King. Hugo's stomach dropped. He had interfered in something far bigger than he realized. Those weren't just random wolf pups. They were heirs. Royal blood. And he had stepped into their den, fought off attackers, and touched something that belonged to the most powerful alpha in the north. That usually ended in execution. Hugo swung his legs off the bed despite the dizziness. "I didn't know who they were. I don't want trouble. I'll leave." Kale didn't move. "That is not an option." "Then make it one." Hugo shot back, forcing strength into his voice even as his body protested. "I didn't ask to be brought here." The physician sighed softly. "You also didn't ask to bleed out in the snow, yet here we are." Hugo clenched his jaw but said nothing. Kale stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "You're alive because the king said so. That should tell you something." It did. It told Hugo that whatever was coming next would not be simple. The room fell quiet for a moment, tension stretching thin. Then the temperature shifted. It wasn't a physical drop, not exactly. It was pressure. Instinct. Every omega sense Hugo had been suppressing snapped awake at once. His body reacted before his thoughts did. Muscles tightening, breath slowing, heart picking up pace. The alpha was here. The door opened again. Gabriel Ardent stepped inside without announcement, and the space changed instantly. He wasn't trying to dominate the room, but his presence did it anyway. Tall, broad, controlled power in every movement. His eyes locked onto Hugo immediately, gold and sharp, missing nothing. Hugo had faced cruel alphas before. Loud ones. Violent ones. Ones who used their power like a weapon. Gabriel was different. He was quiet. And that was worse. Kale stepped aside without being told. The physician bowed his head slightly and moved back. Neither of them spoke. Gabriel closed the distance slowly, his gaze never leaving Hugo. He took in everything at once, the bandages, the posture, the tension, the way Hugo held himself ready to move despite the injury. "You're awake," Gabriel said. His voice was low, steady, carrying authority without effort. Hugo forced himself to meet his gaze. "So are your heirs." A flicker passed through Gabriel's eyes. Not anger. Recognition. "You know who they are now." "I didn't before," Hugo replied. "If I had, I might have still done the same thing." That was the truth. And it slipped out before he could stop it. Silence followed. Gabriel studied him longer this time, as if measuring something beyond words. Then he spoke again. "You fought trained men. Alone. While suppressing your scent." Hugo's chest tightened slightly. "I did what was necessary. You're not a beta. Not a question." Hugo didn't answer immediately. Lying here would be pointless. Gabriel already knew. No, he said finally. The air shifted again, heavier this time, not aggressive but focused. Gabriel stepped closer. Too close for comfort. Hugo's instincts flared, but he didn't move back. He refused to show weakness here. You hit it well, Gabriel said. Until the den. Hugo's fingers tightened slightly at his sides. It wasn't intentional. I know. That answer caught him off guard. Gabriel's gaze dropped briefly, not to intimidate, but to observe. The faint line of binding beneath the fabric. The tension in Hugo's shoulders. The way he held himself like someone used to being controlled and refusing it. Your name, Gabriel said. Hugo hesitated for half a second. Then, Hugo. Not the false one. The real one. Another flicker in Gabriel's eyes. He noticed that too. Hugo, Gabriel repeated quietly, as if testing it. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was charged. Finally, Hugo broke it. You didn't answer my question. Gabriel's gaze sharpened slightly. What question? What do you want from me? Hugo said, voice steady now despite everything. Because people like you don't keep strangers alive without a reason. That was the most honest thing said in the room so far. Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He turned slightly as if considering something beyond Hugo, then looked back at him. My enemies believe you're part of the attack, he said. A planted piece meant to gain my trust. Hugo let out a quiet breath. Of course they do. They are calling for your execution. That part didn't surprise him. Hugo nodded once. Then do it. Kale shifted slightly at that, but Gabriel didn't move. Instead, he stepped even closer, close enough that Hugo could feel the warmth coming off him. A sharp contrast to the cold reputation he carried. I won't, Gabriel said. Hugo frowned slightly. Why? Because my heirs chose you. That answer landed differently than expected. They don't trust easily, Gabriel continued. They didn't come to me. They stayed with you. Hugo didn't know what to say to that. Gabriel's voice dropped slightly, quieter now but more intense. And because you stood between them and death without knowing who they were. Another pause. Then the final piece. You saved what is mine, Gabriel said. That makes you mine to protect. The words should have sounded like ownership, like control. Hugo had heard that tone before from his father, from other alphas who thought omegas were something to claim. But this felt different. Not a cage, a shield. Hugo didn't trust it. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, his body didn't immediately prepare to run. And that alone was more dangerous than anything else. The next few days felt like a controlled storm. Quiet on the surface but heavy underneath. Hugo was not locked in chains, yet every door outside Gabriel's private chambers remained guarded. Every corridor monitored. He understood the message clearly. He was not a guest. He was being kept alive under direct protection, and that protection came with boundaries he could not cross. Gabriel moved in and out of the chambers at irregular hours, never announcing himself, never explaining where he had been. Each time he returned, the tension in the castle seemed sharper. Voices carried from distant halls, arguments muffled but heated. Names repeated often, especially one.
Javier Murcan.
Hugo didn't need a full explanation to know that man was a problem. Despite everything, Gabriel did something unexpected. He brought the pups. The first time it was without warning. The door opened, and 6 small bodies rushed in like a storm, claws clicking against the floor, excited yips echoing off the walls. Hugo barely had time to react before they were on him, climbing into his lap, pressing against his chest, demanding attention as if they had never been separated. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Hugo laughed, a quiet, unguarded sound that surprised even him. His hands moved automatically, checking them, feeling their weight, their warmth, making sure they were truly fine. They smelled clean, well-fed, safe. One of the smaller ones pushed under his arm, settling into the same spot as before, as if it belonged there. They remember you, Gabriel said from near the door. Hugo looked up. Gabriel was watching, arms crossed, expression unreadable but not cold. There was something else there, something softer buried deep. They're just pups, Hugo said, though his hand didn't stop moving, gently scratching behind one ear. They remember who feeds them. That's not all they remember. The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different from before. It wasn't tense. It was steady. Gabriel stepped closer, slower this time, as if approaching something fragile rather than something dangerous. They've refused handlers since the attack, he added. Except you. Hugo didn't respond immediately. That wasn't something he knew how to process. He had spent most of his life being told his presence was a weakness, a liability, something to be hidden or controlled. And yet here were 6 alpha heirs choosing him without hesitation. That's inconvenient, Hugo said finally, trying to keep his tone neutral. Gabriel almost smiled. That small shift changed something. The distance between them didn't feel as sharp anymore. Gabriel didn't stand over him like a king judging a subject. He stood closer, watching, studying, but not with suspicion this time. With interest. You're not afraid of them, Gabriel said. They're not the ones I should be afraid of, Hugo replied. That earned a real reaction. A slight narrowing of Gabriel's eyes. Not anger, but recognition. You're still planning to leave, Gabriel said. Hugo met his gaze. Yes. That would be a mistake. That depends on what happens if I stay. Neither of them looked away. For a second, the air shifted again, not from dominance this time, but something else. Something closer to tension, to awareness. Hugo felt it before he could stop himself. His suppressants were wearing thinner with each passing day. Being this close to a dominant alpha made it worse. Gabriel noticed. Of course he did. You're running out, Gabriel said quietly. Hugo didn't pretend not to understand. I'll manage. No, Gabriel said. Firm but not harsh. You won't. Hugo's jaw tightened. He didn't like being told what he could or couldn't handle. I've handled worse. I don't doubt that. The answer came too easily. Too calm. Gabriel stepped closer again, closing the remaining space between them. Hugo felt it instantly, the shift in air, the pressure, not forced but present. His body reacted despite his control, a subtle tension, a slight hitch in his breath. Gabriel stopped just short of touching him. You don't have to fight everything here, he said, voice lower now, almost private. That was the problem. Hugo didn't know how not to. Before he could respond, the door opened abruptly. Kale entered, faster than usual, expression tight. That alone was enough to break whatever moment had been building. My king, Kale said, voice controlled but urgent. The council has convened. Javier is pushing for immediate judgment. Gabriel didn't look away from Hugo right away. When he finally did, the warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. What claim? Gabriel asked. That Hugo is a planted Omega, Kale replied. That the attack was staged to gain access to the heirs. He's calling for execution before sunset. Hugo let out a quiet breath. There it was. The inevitable turn. Gabriel's posture didn't change much, but the room felt heavier. Of course he is, Hugo said under his breath. Gabriel turned back to him. You knew this would happen. I expected something like it. And you're still planning to walk out of here? Gabriel asked. Hugo held his gaze. If I stay, I become your problem. If I leave, I become theirs. Either way, I don't win. That's not entirely true. Hugo frowned slightly. Then explain it. Gabriel stepped forward again, close enough now that there was no distance left. His voice dropped, steady, absolute. If you stay, you are under my protection, he said. No one touches you without facing me. Hugo's chest tightened slightly. And the council? They will be handled. That's not an answer, Hugo said. It's the only one that matters. The confidence in that statement should have sounded like arrogance. Didn't. It sounded like certainty. Kale shifted slightly near the door. My king, they're waiting. Gabriel nodded once, then looked back at Hugo. You're coming with me, he said. Hugo blinked. That sounds like a bad idea. It is, Gabriel replied. For them. That was not reassuring. Hugo stood slowly, ignoring the lingering dizziness. The pups stirred at the movement, reluctant to let him go. But Gabriel stepped in, gently guiding them back. "They'll be safe," Gabriel said quietly. Hugo hesitated for half a second, then nodded. As he moved toward the door, Gabriel's hand caught his wrist briefly. Not tight, not controlling, just enough to stop him. Hugo looked down at it, then back up. "For what it's worth," Gabriel said, voice lower now, meant only for him, "I'm not letting them take you." There was no hesitation in that statement. No doubt. Hugo didn't know if that was a promise or a warning. Maybe both. But as they stepped out of the chambers together and into the waiting storm of the council, Hugo realized something had already shifted. He was no longer just trying to survive this place. Now he was part of it. The council chamber was already loud when Gabriel pushed the doors open. But the moment he stepped inside, every voice died instantly. Power didn't need to be announced here. It was felt. And Gabriel Ardent carried it like a storm contained in human form. Hugo followed one step behind, fully aware that every eye in the room had shifted to him, measuring, judging, calculating his worth and how quickly he could be removed. At the center of the chamber stood Javier Morcant, tall, composed, dressed in dark formal layers that marked both status and control. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice unless it benefited him, and even now, despite being interrupted, he recovered quickly. His gaze moved from Gabriel to Hugo, and a thin, knowing smile touched his lips. "My king," Javier said smoothly, bowing just enough to show respect without lowering himself too much. "We were beginning to worry. There are urgent matters that require your attention." "I'm aware," Gabriel replied, his voice flat. "You've made them urgent." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Javier didn't react outwardly. "Then you understand the situation. The Omega you've brought into your private chambers is an unknown variable. He appeared at the exact moment your heirs were attacked. He killed one of the assailants and allowed another to escape. That is not coincidence. That is strategy." Hugo kept his expression neutral, but he could feel the weight of the accusation settling in the room. It was well constructed, logical enough to sound convincing, dangerous enough to turn the council. Gabriel stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Hugo without making it obvious. "Or," he said calmly, "it is exactly what it looks like. Someone saved my heirs." Javier's smile didn't fade. "An Omega drifter with combat training strong enough to defeat trained killers? With the ability to bypass hidden security? Forgive me, my king, but that sounds less like luck and more like infiltration." Murmurs followed that statement. Hugo's fingers curled slightly at his sides. He had expected this. What he hadn't expected was how controlled everything felt. This wasn't chaos. This was a setup, built carefully to corner Gabriel into a decision. Javier took a step closer, voice still calm, persuasive. "We cannot ignore the possibility that he was placed here. Gaining your trust through a staged rescue would be effective. And if that is the case, keeping him alive is a direct threat to the stability of the crown." There it was. Execution, wrapped in logic. Gabriel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're asking me to kill the person who kept my bloodline alive." "I'm asking you to protect your kingdom," Javier corrected. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Gabriel turned slightly, just enough for Hugo to feel the shift. He wasn't speaking to the council now. He was giving Hugo the choice. Hugo understood immediately. This wasn't about proving innocence. Not entirely. This was about control. If Gabriel spoke for him, it would confirm Javier's argument that Hugo was being protected blindly. If Hugo spoke for himself, it could shift the balance or destroy it completely. Hugo stepped forward. The movement drew every eye again. He ignored it. "My name is Hugo Viral," he said, voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. "I was born in the Southern Territories under Lord Mateo Viral." That caused a stir. Several council members exchanged glances. The name carried weight, influence, reputation. Javier's eyes sharpened slightly. "I ran," Hugo continued, "because I refused to be sold as a breeding tool. I cut my scent, hid my identity, and survived however I could. I ended up here. That's all." "That explains your presence," Javier said smoothly. "Not your actions." Hugo met his gaze directly. "I didn't know who those pups were." I saw two armed men about to kill something defenseless. I acted. Convenient, Javier replied. And yet, one of those men escaped. Hugo didn't look away. Because I chose to protect instead of chase. That landed harder than expected. Javier's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing again. Or because you needed him alive. That's enough. Gabriel's voice cut through the room, low but absolute. The air shifted instantly. He stepped forward fully now, placing a hand on Hugo's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was clear. Public. Undeniable. This Omega is under my protection, Gabriel said. That is not a request. That is a statement. The room went completely still. Javier's smile faded just slightly. My king, personal attachment cannot cloud. This is not attachment, Gabriel interrupted. This is judgment. The difference mattered. But Javier wasn't finished. He had prepared for resistance. Then allow us to test that judgment, he said. If he is truly innocent, he has nothing to fear. Hugo's instincts flared. Gabriel's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. What test? Gabriel asked. Javier's gaze locked onto Hugo. Truth. The word sounded simple. It wasn't. Somewhere in the northern bloodlines there were abilities tied to command. Influence. Control over instinct itself. Hugo didn't know all the details, but he knew enough to recognize danger. Javier took another step forward. Let him speak under command. If he is lying, it will break. If he is telling the truth, it will hold. A trap. If Hugo resisted, it would look like guilt. If he submitted, he risked losing control entirely. Gabriel went still. Then slowly, he stepped in front of Hugo. No. The single word carried more weight than anything said so far. Javier's expression hardened. Refusing a simple verification will only confirm suspicion. Gabriel's eyes turned colder. You're not in a position to demand anything. For the first time, tension cracked through Javier's calm. The council has authority. The council has limits, Gabriel said. Silence again. Then something shifted. Hugo felt it first. A pressure, subtle but growing, not from Gabriel this time, but from within the room itself. From the structure. From the ancient stone beneath their feet. It wasn't directed at him. It was directed at Javier. Hugo didn't understand it fully, but he felt it clearly. Something old. Something tied to authority beyond politics. Gabriel turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Hugo. Their eyes met for half a second. That was all it took. Hugo understood. He stepped forward again. I'll speak, he said. Gabriel's expression tightened. You don't have to. I know, Hugo replied quietly. But I will. He turned back to Javier. You want the truth? Hugo said. Then listen carefully. The room seemed to lean in. I didn't plan anything. I didn't come here for power. I didn't even know what I was stepping into. I saw danger and I acted. That's it. His voice didn't rise, but something in it carried. Javier's eyes narrowed. That's not enough. Hugo took one more step forward. It is, he said. And this time something else moved with his words. It wasn't visible. Not fully. But the air shifted. The faintest trace of his true nature slipped past the last cracks of suppression. Not a full Omega scent. Something deeper. Softer. Resonant. The effect was immediate. The tension in the room changed. Not gone. Not broken. But disrupted. Javier stiffened. For the first time, his composure slipped. Gabriel noticed. So did everyone else. That was the moment everything turned. Gabriel stepped forward again, voice cutting clean through the chamber. This discussion is over. Javier opened his mouth to argue. Gabriel didn't let him. Seize him. The command landed like a strike. For a split second, no one moved. Then the guards did. Javier's eyes widened, shock breaking through fully now. You have no proof. I don't need proof, Gabriel said, his gaze cold and absolute. I need control. The guards closed in. Javier struggled once, sharply, but it was already over. The balance had shifted, and he knew it. As he was dragged away, his eyes locked onto Hugo one last time. Not fear. Not defeat. Something darker. This wasn't finished. But for now it was enough. The chamber slowly came back to life, voices rising, questions forming, power realigning. And in the center of it all, Hugo stood still, realizing one thing clearly. He had just crossed a line there was no coming back from. The aftermath did not settle quietly. Power never shifted without resistance, and even with Javier Morcant dragged from the chamber, the damage he had caused did not disappear overnight. The council fractured, alliances broke apart, and those who had stood behind Javier began scrambling to protect themselves before Gabriel turned his attention fully toward them. But Gabriel did not rush. That alone unsettled them more than open violence ever could. Hugo remained in the private chambers, not as a prisoner anymore, but not entirely free either. The guards outside had not been removed, but their purpose had changed. They were no longer there to keep him in. They were there to keep others out. On the third night after the council confrontation, everything broke. It started with the pups. Hugo noticed it first. They had been restless all day, their usual energy dulled, their movements slower. At first, he thought it was exhaustion or stress from the recent events, but by nightfall, something was clearly wrong. One of the smallest curled into itself, refusing food. Another let out a weak, strained whine that didn't match any normal discomfort. Hugo's chest tightened. "Gabriel," he called, sharper than usual. The Alpha King was across the room instantly. "What is it?" "They're not right," Hugo said, already moving, checking each of them quickly. Their bodies were warm. Too warm. Their breathing uneven. Gabriel's expression darkened immediately. "Poison." The word hit like a blade. Within minutes, the chamber was filled with movement. The royal physician arrived, hands steady but eyes tense as he examined the pups. Kale followed close behind, already issuing quiet orders to lock down the inner sections of the castle. "It's not a normal toxin," the physician said after a short moment. "It's slow, hidden, meant to weaken over time. I can't treat it with standard remedies." Hugo's stomach dropped. "Then what do we do?" The physician didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Gabriel didn't move from where he stood beside the pups. His hands hovered, not touching, as if he could hold them together by force alone. But Hugo saw it. The shift. The subtle crack in control. This wasn't just fear. This was something deeper. The bond. Hugo had heard about it in fragments. The connection between an alpha and his heirs. Something instinctual, something tied to survival itself. If the pups weakened, Gabriel would feel it. And he was. A tremor ran through Gabriel's arm. Hugo turned just in time to see him brace against the edge of the table. His breathing uneven for the first time since they had met. "Gabriel." "I'm fine," Gabriel said, but the words came out strained. He wasn't. The room grew colder. Not metaphorically. Physically. The warmth from the fire seemed to fade. Frost creeping faintly along the edges of nearby surfaces. Hugo felt it immediately, his instincts reacting, his body trying to adjust to the sudden drop. The physician stepped back. "My king." Gabriel didn't respond. His eyes had changed. The gold dimming, fading toward something duller, colder. The connection was breaking. The poison wasn't just killing the pups. It was taking him down with them. "No," Hugo said under his breath. He moved without thinking, dropping to his knees beside the pups. His hands hovering just like Gabriel's had been moments before. He didn't know what to do. The herbs he knew wouldn't work. The physician had already confirmed that. But doing nothing wasn't an option. He reached out anyway. The moment his fingers brushed against the fur of the nearest pup, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. A faint vibration, almost unnoticeable, ran up his arm. Hugo froze for half a second, then looked down. The floor beneath the furs. There were markings there. Ancient. Faint. Easy to miss unless you were already looking. Runes. Hugo's breath caught. He hadn't noticed them before, not fully. But now, with everything else stripped away, they felt active. Responsive. Another tremor ran through Gabriel's body. Time was gone. Hugo pressed his palm fully against the floor. The reaction was immediate. The runes lit up. Soft at first, a pale glow that spread outward in slow, spiraling patterns. Then stronger, brighter. The air thickened, charged with something old and powerful. "What are you doing?" Kale demanded, but he didn't move closer. Hugo didn't answer, because he didn't know. His chest tightened, breath catching as something inside him unlocked, something he had never fully touched before. The suppressants, the years of control, the constant effort to stay small and unnoticed, all of it cracked at once. His voice came out before he could stop it. Soft, then stronger. Not words at first, just sound. A low, steady tone that didn't belong to normal speech. The room reacted instantly. The tension shifted. The cold receded slightly. The pup's breathing changed. Just a little, but enough to notice. Hugo's eyes widened, so he kept going. The sound deepened, layered, turning into something structured, something older than language. His hand pressed harder against the glowing runes, and the light responded, flowing upward, wrapping around his arm without burning, without pain. The power wasn't overwhelming. It was guiding. Hugo turned toward Gabriel. The Alpha King was on his knees now, one hand braced against the ground, the other clutching his chest. His eyes were almost fully dimmed, his body locked in that unnatural cold. Hugo moved closer. "Stay with me," he said. But his voice wasn't just his anymore. Carried weight, resonance. He placed his free hand against Gabriel's chest. The reaction was immediate. The light surged. It flowed from the runes through Hugo and into Gabriel. The cold shattered, not violently, but steadily, like ice melting under controlled heat. The dullness in Gabriel's eyes flickered, then shifted, gold breaking through again. Hugo didn't stop. He turned his focus to the pups, the sound shifting again, softer now, but no less powerful. The light followed, wrapping around each small body, seeping into them, pushing against whatever poison had taken hold. One by one, their breathing steadied. The tension broke. The glow dimmed slowly, the runes fading back into the stone as if nothing had happened. Silence followed. Heavy. Real. Hugo's strength gave out first. His voice cut off abruptly as the last of the energy drained away. He swayed, barely catching himself before falling completely. Gabriel moved faster. One moment he was across the room, the next he was there, catching Hugo before he hit the ground. His grip was strong, steady, nothing like the weakness from moments before. "Hugo," he said, voice low, urgent. Hugo blinked slowly, trying to focus. "They're okay." Gabriel didn't answer immediately, because he was looking at him differently now. Not with suspicion. Not just with interest. With certainty. The pups stirred behind them. Small movements, soft sounds returning, alive and stable. Kale exhaled quietly. The physician stepped forward, checking them again, hands shaking slightly despite his experience. "It's gone," the old man said after a moment. "Whatever it was, it's gone." Gabriel's hold on Hugo tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to anchor. "You did that," he said. Hugo let out a weak breath. "I didn't mean to, I just—" "You did," Gabriel repeated. There was no doubt in his voice. None at all. Hugo looked at him, really looked this time, and for the first time there was no fear in his chest. Just something unfamiliar. Something steady. Gabriel shifted slightly, pulling him closer without thinking. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was a decision already made. Hugo didn't argue, because for the first time since he had run from everything he knew, the idea of staying didn't feel like a trap. Felt like a choice. And outside the chamber, as the remaining conspirators were hunted down and the last of Javier's influence collapsed completely, the balance of the kingdom reset. Not around power, but around something stronger. Trust. By the time the first signs of spring reached the northern lands, the castle no longer felt like a battlefield. The council had been rebuilt. The traitors removed. The threats ended completely. And in the highest chamber, overlooking a land finally at peace, Gabriel stood beside Hugo, 6 young heirs running freely around them, loud, alive, unstoppable. "You changed everything," Gabriel said quietly. Hugo shook his head slightly. "No, I just refused to let it break." Gabriel almost smiled. Then he reached out, pulling Hugo closer without hesitation this time. And Hugo let him. No fear. No resistance. Just something real. Something finished. Something that didn't need to run anymore. And that's the end of our story, where strength met compassion, and love rewrote fate itself. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.